Hello, team. I was waiting for more folks to come, and I was refreshing to see if more than 2 people turned in their paper. But only 2 people have turned in the draft of the paper. So let's do a little check-in about our progress on the paper. And today we have AROC coming at 1:30, and they are the Arab Resource and Organizing Committee. And they're going to talk about some of their campaigns related to ethnic studies, urban shields, and the Arabic language in schools. There are only 4 of you here, and only 2 people turned in their draft papers. So I was going to have us peer edit the papers. Oh, good. I'm glad you're going to upload your paper soon. So what do folks think about in terms of using our time today? Would we want to peer edit papers until AROC comes to join us? Do people need more time to work on their paper before peer editing, given that people didn't upload it? What do folks want and need today?
So I'm not gonna lie, I am nowhere near done or prepared to do, the paper. I pretty much have like the brainstorming part. I did research on this I forgot his name. Let me pull it up. I have it right here. James Birch.
Yay, great.
Yeah, so I'm like reading his bio and stuff like that, picking out details. But no, I don't have enough for it to even be peer editable. So yeah.
Okay. Well, Danielle and Joe do, but it seems like we should have more people ready to do that. Shannon, are you at a place where you want peer input, or are you not far enough for that to be meaningful either?
No, I think input would be meaningful. How are people, so are we just uploading it as a Google Doc? Like, how are people uploading it?
I do
format?
Just like a Word doc.
A Word doc, okay.
And then the question in the chat is, are the recordings available? So all the recordings are on the homepage right now. It links us to Zoom, but Tiffany is on, our new ISA, and I think she and Tanya are working on a plan to get them to get the website more spiffy. Did you want to talk about I don't know if you've gotten to the part about your vision for the videos, but you want to talk about that if you have?
Yeah, definitely. So we're reaching out to the computer science department to get someone who's a little bit more tech savvy with us to work on the WordPress so it can be a little bit more obvious and just user friendly. So that's that. And then for the videos, we wanted to do a kind of a roundup video that has clips from a variety of the panelists that cover a variety of topics. So we want to get that out, within a week or so. And I'm going to be working on that. Yeah, and if you guys have any like favorite people or favorite moments that you just want to send my way, go for it. I'm going to be editing it. And so, yeah, just to share the information. And we do have a post up today on for Earth Day with Angela Aguilar. She spoke with an environmental group. And so I just posted one of her quotes on Instagram to kind of perpetuate the content. Yeah, I think that's what we have going on for now. Hi, everybody.
Do you want to share the stuff you wrote last week to summarize it for the newsletter?
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay, so yeah, let me grab it real quick. And so I said that Sonoma State University would like to thank all the attendees and panelists for a remarkably successful Social Justice Week 2021. We heard from an array of activists, educators, and politicians discussing important topics such as human trafficking, mental health, environmental justice, and Indigenous identity. We are enormously proud of our student organizers, all of you guys, who hosted and planned 20 plus events for 5 whole days of community activism. And then I also noted, this is on Instagram, and I think it posts on the social science page too on Sonoma State. And so I said, if you missed it, don't worry, follow the link to our WordPress, which right now has it in the format that you guys know, but we're gonna work hard to kind of get that, you know, to more clickable to have as like an archive. So yeah, thank you, thank you.
Bow and clappy emoji. All right. So it seems like it'll be helpful for 3 people, but hopefully more folks will be joining us today. So maybe we shouldn't do the editing at the beginning. Maybe we should wait till the end. Next week, we're going to have Sharon Fuller, who is a professor at Sonoma, talking about the African diaspora, indigeneity, intersectional feminism, and ecology, and talking specifically about our work on coastal fishing communities and climate change. And Marlena Mercado talking about organizing for prison abolition and how to get students involved. So those are the topics we'll talk about next week. You will also have the paper due next week, and then I'm going to delete this web team assignment because Tiffany will be taking care of that. So that's what we have for next week. I guess we can wait for more people to go on and wait for our guest lecturers. I'll post right now. Some students from SSU are hosting a forum on Black Lives Matter in Sonoma County. They're Correct scholars doing research. So that's another update on that. I think we can just have people either work on papers solo for 20 minutes, or we can talk about current events. I know the Chauvin verdict is on everybody's mind, and either people really want to talk about it or people really don't want to talk about it. You know, that is my area of law, you know, suing government officials who engage in excessive force, and you know, those kinds of issues with qualified immunity and all of that. So I have a lot of knowledge to answer any questions about, also as a criminal defense attorney, about sentencing and stuff like that. So I'm happy to talk about it. I'm also happy to let you have a break from thinking and talking about it. But I think those are the 2 things I would propose with the time we have: either give folks time to work on your papers until our guests get here, or talk about what everyone's talking about. So what do folks feel like? What do the 5 of you feel like? It feels so silly without the rest of the class here to have like a whole formal class.
Yeah, Professor Henry, if I could just say something real quick. Like, just the fact that you just brought it up, and like, you're the first teacher I've had like this semester who's actually like brought this up, and like being able to create space to engage in shit like this. And like, I'm privileged because I'm a student leader on campus, and like I have a platform that not a lot of students have access to. And that's like one of the things I've been working on with my dean, is to create opportunities to engage in this dialogue and engage in this discussion. Because that's where everything starts, right? And like, the shit that pissed me off is just like walking into class, walking into class every day and just going through the motions, like everything's okay. You know, just preparing for the next thing, you know, preparing for the next quiz, going over the agenda, what's today's lesson, diving into curriculum. And like, I'm not gonna lie, half the shit, like, that's why I have my camera off sometimes, because half the shit we're learning is like going through one ear and out the other, when I'm just constantly just seeing just people that look like me being killed every day. And it's like, where do we focus in on one fight, right? Because as soon as you focus in on one, there's another one that just happened, and not even the ones that are even like on the news that we hear about, right? So I just want to just thank you, just not as just like as a student, but as like just like a Black man in America, is just to thank you just for creating this opportunity. Like, I know there's only like 6 of us here, but shit, like that's where it starts. Like, it could be one-on-one.
Hi, Caitlin. Thank you for inviting us to this space. So my name is Yusra. I'm the youth coordinator. I'm one of the youth coordinators at the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. And we're here to present on AROC's work, so previous campaigns, AROC's services, and what we've been working on recently. We do have a presentation plan, so I think Sharif might need access to share screen just to be able to present the presentation. And you'll be hearing a little bit about everything AROC has done these past few years, our roles, and our current campaign. I'm gonna quickly pass it to Sharif, just so he can introduce himself.
Hey everyone, happy to be here with y'all. My name is Sharif, he, him, his. I'm an organizer with the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, and just appreciate y'all there sharing your thoughts. This has been a really heavy month, and just like I feel like it's been heavy on top of heavy on top of heavy for like ever. Just to directly respond, to you, Caitlin, I'll look for it and try to put it in the chat. AROC is a part of this national formation called the Rising Majority, which is a project of the Movement for Black Lives. And so there was a statement that was put out, I believe yesterday. So let me see if I could find that, but great to be with you all. I'll also pass it to Noura to introduce herself while I set up this presentation.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Nora. I'm the other youth coordinator at the Arab Resource and Organizing Center.
So this is the presentation we have. I don't know how y'all want to do it, but we could present, and if anyone has a question, you could raise your hand, or if you want to wait till the end. I don't know, Caitlin, how do you think that this should be done?
This is a chattier group, a small group than the rest of the students that aren't here. So I think all of these folks are pretty empowered to ask a question or say it in the chat. If I see a question in the chat, but you don't see it because you have the slides on, I'll just read it out loud. But students are definitely, that are here today, super engaged, and I think we'll just unmute their mics if they have a question, or they might not because they don't want to be rude, and then I can read it and be rude.
If you want to ask a question, please do. That's what we like. We try to usually, because everything's on Zoom, we usually found with our youth, because they're so shy, that they like to have discussions towards the end. But if you have a question when we're talking about a topic, feel free to unmute yourself or ask the question in the chat. So we are the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. Sharif, do you want to? So we are based in San Francisco, off of Valencia Street. So if you get off of 16th Street, Mission BART, it's like a 5-minute walk to our office. We're also in the same building as Center for Political Education, Catalyst Project, Freedom Archives, and Mission Graduates. All these organizations do great work against racism, and we work closely with these organizations as well when it comes to movement building and just supporting one another. I'm going to talk now about AROC's work. We provide direct services, advocacy, and organizing. Our direct services, I'll talk about them soon, as well as our advocacy and organizing will be going into our campaigns and how we advocate for our community members as well. So one of our services is we have the Arab American Legal Services. So we provide free immigration services to Arabs and Muslims in the Bay Area. We see about 300 clients a year. I started working at AROC right when the Muslim ban was initiated. So AROC lawyers were very busy since I started working, and had some relief when we realized, okay, now, even though things don't really change with these systems, we've seen a slight difference with, Biden's policies versus Trump's when it comes to our community and the services we provide. So yeah, our services are free, and we don't turn anyone away. If we feel like a case isn't something we could take on, we also work with other organizations that provide similar services and connect those community members to that specific service. And we work on immigrant rights. Obviously, our immigration lawyers, we do have immigration lawyers, and we do try to focus on making sure that everyone is supported and treated humanely and with dignity. Pretty soon we'll be talking about how our community showed up when the Muslim ban happened. And even Sharif, if you want to quickly just mention the ICE rapid response phone calls that you're a part of against ICE calls.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Yusra. So just a little bit to talk about, just to take a step back around the service, advocacy, and organizing. for us, a lot of times organizations will either take up just the service work or just the advocacy and organizing. But we actually early on decided that we needed a hybrid model. And the reason is because a lot of our communities, especially our working class and immigrant sectors, don't have the access they need to be able to engage with schools, with the city, even lack of Arabic language, different things like that. So when we formed as AROC, and we were in the Bay Area since the 80s, but we were part of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, and then we shifted into AROC after 9/11 around 2004, 2005. And for us, we wanted to include all three because we felt that if we could provide tangible material changes for a community, if we can provide working class folks like services for free, then we can not only just build community with them, but we could also organize them. And so for us, that was a really important reason why we went into services, because for us, we wanted to not just give them what they needed, but we wanted to actually build their power and uplift our communities. And so AROC was actually one of the founders of something called the San Francisco Immigrant Legal Education Network. This is a group of a bunch of different legal organizations, about 12 of them, who hold down all of the non-private immigration work in the city. And we are the only ones who actually have Arabic capabilities. So oftentimes our working class Arab immigrants come from all over the Bay Area, and we serve everyone in the Bay Area, not just within San Francisco. But within San Francisco, we also host the ICE hotline. So part of our work also is to recognize that even though we do serve the Arab and Muslim community primarily, we are inextricably tied to each other in our struggles and in the way we fight back. And so for us, a lot of our immigration work is to uplift all of our communities. And so myself, I actually dispatch the line, and sometimes people will call in Spanish or Cantonese or whatever. We got to get them the support they need regardless. And some of the advocacy work, sorry, my people bar is covering the top. And so these are some examples of advocacy as well, where in front of City Hall, where we were trying to fight off against like Islamophobia, targeting of specific workers. And I'll go ahead and pass it off to, is it Yusra or Noura on this one?
Nura.
Go ahead, Noura.
Yeah, thanks, Sharif. So as Sharif mentioned, we really want to work to build the power of our working class communities in the Bay Area. And we want to work to mobilize the people most indirectly impacted by these issues of anti-Arab racism. And a lot of the times it's youth who are some of the most marginalized people within our community. So within Arab youth organizing, we essentially work to like empower youth, provide them leadership trainings. And the long-term goal is to organize them and have them become organizers so they can fight for long-term changes within the community. So me, for example, I came to AROC as a 16-year-old. And I stayed throughout the years, and I'm now a youth coordinator, and I'm going to be a part of the membership long term. And this is at my complete free will, so they're not holding me hostage. Just saying. But it's a part of AROC's work is to directly build power and empower the people most impacted by this issue. So in this picture, for example, you see that we prioritize our youth leading protests and directing the chants so they feel a sense of empowerment. So the way we recruit and work with youth is by going to schools that have high number of Arab students, and we essentially host weekly meetings with them. I just got onboarded last year, so unfortunately I never had the opportunity to work in person with youth, but we do Zoom meetings with a number of students with a variety of needs. Some of them have just recently arrived to the US, others were born and raised here. Sometimes we give those presentations in Arabic. So what you guys see here is basically our weekly meetings where we just talk about identity and organizing and the different work that we do. In the top right-hand corner, you see our Tawrath report. So Tawrath means heritage in Arabic, and the acronym stands for Teaching and Understanding, representing Arabs throughout history. So this was an example of the power of youth work. So the youth decided that they would compile together a survey that looked at Arab experiences of Arab students in schools, and also kind of compiled the perception that non-Arab students had about Arab students. And the results showed that there was a dire need for representation, Arab representation in the curriculum, because they were practically invisible, and that a number of youth experienced anti-Arab racism in their schools.
Cool. And to echo what Nura was saying, a lot of our organizational kind of like how we decide to get into certain campaigns and issues. So our youth, you know, saw what Nadine Neber coins as feeling invisible within schools, but feeling hyper visible outside of schools. So clearly there's always been this kind of fascination with like Middle Easterners, Arabs, Muslims, especially in media, in the ways in which our country is interacting with our homelands, but within the schools, practically zero. And so we found these findings, and our youth decided the first step, what we needed to do was we needed to actually have access, just basic access to Arabic materials and resources. A lot of the, even like within San Francisco Unified School District for a long time did not have forms in Arabic. And we had a pretty high immigrant population that usually reflected the things that were happening in our homeland. So when the Iraq War happened, we had an influx of Iraqi refugees. Right now, there's a major humanitarian crisis in Yemen. So we're also seeing a lot of Yemeni folks coming in too. And so we wanted to make sure that we at least had Arabic for them, and we can help our families in being able to navigate these systems like any other family, especially as San Francisco, one of the more progressive cities in the country. And so we actually launched the Arabic Pathways findings. So we organized with our youth. We organized actually a lot of the moms in the Tenderloin, which is in the district of San Francisco. And we were able to push for Arabic translations as well as Arabic classes. And so now they're teaching Arabic within SF Unified at Marina Middle School, at I'm forgetting the Reading Elementary and Mission High School. And so that's some of the youth work and how we got involved with some of the local stuff around Arabic. Now, of course, oh, I see a hand. Go for it.
Yeah, just touching on what you just said in terms of like having that sense of like invisibility and hyper invisibility going outside of school. So I just want to touch on, like, I took a recent writing intensive course last year, or last semester, but it was actually focused. I didn't know what the focus of the course was on, but it was on Arab American and Muslim writers. And it was actually the first time I was introduced to, you know, like those forms of studies in at least in Arab American culture, and learning about different cultures of, you know, just like Middle Eastern in general. But in terms of that, like, how can we, like, as students, push academic institutions to offer more courses that represent Arab American and, you know, Muslim studies?
I think that's a great question. And you're like super ahead of our presentation right now. I don't know if Nura or Yusra also want to directly answer to that, but I do want to share that, and I will get to it. Our current campaign is actually around ethnic studies. And a lot of the conversations around ethnic studies is the inclusion of Arab American studies and Pacific Islander studies right now. So we'll talk a little more about that, but I don't know if Yusra or Nura want to say anything to that.
I guess quickly, I would say I went to SF State, and there is a minor there. It's called Arab Muslim Ethnicities and the Diaspora Studies. So there are programs like this, even classes offered at Berkeley like that too, but they are poorly funded, and sometimes even fought against, or a lot of the times fought against from other people on campus that don't want these classes to be there. But yeah, like Sharif said, we will be talking about our campaign, which directly touches on your question.
Joe's a future well, you're already an educator, you're already teaching, but Joe will be a formal a recognized educator soon. So
Kindergarten teacher.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, and so of course, you know, when Trump came into the mix, that was a huge, for many communities, that was a huge shift. And so for our communities, you know, there was, I would say specifically an attack on our immigrant communities and kind of reinforcing this whole really messed up narrative of like Arabs and Muslims are the terrorists, therefore they shouldn't be coming into this country. And so back in 2017, after he made the executive order, early 2017, I think it was January 2017, made the executive order, there were a lot of different airports that actually started to, you know, hold these massive rallies and were mobilized to basically say this is not okay and like the people will not stand for that. And at San Francisco International, I remember that day I was actually on BART headed to do a presentation like this one for another school. And then I got the call and we were like, hey, we're all going to the airport. And so when we went to the airport, there were over 5,000 of us. And I would say that like as an Arab, seeing space like this, like claim, you know, we feel very hyper policed in an airport. And so to go here and to see our people in power and to actually see the amount of like solidarity we had with our community who are saying like, no, this is not all right. This is clearly xenophobic and we will not stand for this. We were there for a few days and actually every single family who was detained by Customs and Border Patrol was released that day. So this was a really clear example of how people power and oftentimes even spontaneous people power has a lot of pull and a lot of push. And even similar to when we're talking about the Derek Chauvin trial, like that trial would not have happened if it weren't for people putting pressure on the system. And so this is a really clear and really important example of that. And so for me, this really sticks out in my mind. And some of you may have even been at these airports when this happened. But it was definitely great. Yes, awesome. Cool. And so I'm going to shift it a little bit into kind of some of our work around anti-war, militarism, and repression. And so for us, AROC is a very hyper-local organization. We are a part of some national formations, like I mentioned earlier, like the Rising Majority. But really, a lot of our work is really rooted in our local area. And how can we actually support and uplift the Arab and Muslim communities here in the Bay, and specifically around anti-war, militarism, and repression. And so for AROC, we understand that a lot of our communities come from experiences of occupation, come from experiences of war. And when they come to the US, they actually see a lot of the same tactics and tools used on them by law enforcement. The stuff they see, the surveillance state, the ways that even if our community isn't being specifically targeted by law enforcement, the ways that even Black and Brown communities in general have been targeted by law enforcement are very noticeable for our communities. And so for a lot of our work, we try to really focus around these three things. And it's also really important for us that we do all of our work within cross-movement spaces. The Arab and Muslim community is not a monolith. We have many different identities. We come in many different ways. And so for us, we understand our struggles as tied to all these other struggles. And so we really think it's important that we don't just lift up our Arab, you know, what's happening in the Arab world, but we also lift up what's happening in Haiti, in the Philippines, in South and Central America, even here in Black America. Like these are all really important things that are affecting all of us, and we all have power where we live, and so we understand that as AROC. This is a photo actually. So there was a few years back, shortly after the death of Mike Brown, I believe, there was a call for a shutdown of Oakland federal spaces for 48 hours by the Anti-Police Terror Project. And so our organization, amongst several other organizations, were engaged and wanted to actually put our bodies on the line and say, you know, we're here in solidarity. And we're able to shut down the Oakland Federal Building. And then from there, we actually created a network called Third World Resistance, which still exists till today, where it's a bunch of organizations who represent different communities that we would say from the third world, really to feel how we can like show up for Black folks here and internationally as well. All right, I'll go ahead and pass it off to you, Sarah, to talk about Block the Boat.
So Block the Boat was, this happened in 2014. I was actually in college and was not part of AROC at the time, but AROC did organize many protests that I've gone to before I started working there, especially for Palestine and during the Arab Spring. So in 2014, Gaza, which is a part of Palestine, it was getting bombed, and there were protests for Palestine that summer. I remember it was Ramadan, we were fasting, and every weekend we would show up and protest the Israeli war crimes and occupation of Palestine and bombings of Gaza. And around the same time of the bombings, there was going to be a ship that was going to come from Israel and dock in Oakland and bring down their goods. This was a Zim ship line, and AROC decided to host basically a protest and action where we blocked the boat from docking its goods. So there is this movement. It's called Boycott, Divest, Sanction Movement against Israel. So it's basically participating in refusing to purchase goods that support the Israeli war crimes that occur in Palestine. This played into that. We did not want Israeli goods to come into the Bay Area to be sold. And AROC and other organizers worked closely with the IOW, which is the union that would undock these boats or the ship. And what ended up happening was these organizers also refused to actually unload the ships from apartheid South Africa. Which really, the boycott movement really hit apartheid South Africa really hard and forced them to pay attention to what the world was saying. So this is a similar practice that people do with Israel, where they refuse to purchase goods. For example, I don't buy like Starbucks. I choose not to buy it because I know how that plays into Israeli war crimes, or Coca-Cola, companies like that. After it was beautiful because we were fasting, and the boat was supposed to dock, and protesters showed up, and the dock workers refused to unload the ship, and the ship then went to Los Angeles to undock there, and organizers there that were communicating with organizers in the Bay Area also refused to unload the ships, and the ship kept going back and forth until it finally just went back and didn't come back, and it hasn't come back since. So it was a very successful and moving moment for a lot of us here.
Awesome, thank you, Yusra. I just wanted to add a one more thing, actually. Yeah, so part of our organizing strategy around this too was the ILWU Local 10 Longshoremen Worker Union. They, for us, we understand like working communities as being very important in our movements and being very important in our struggles. And so we actually went to the union hall like at 5 a.m, like every day for a month, being like, hey, y'all, this is why we want you to stop work with us, and why y'all want, like, we should do this. And actually a lot of the workers in Gaza who were in the ports actually had a call requesting folks support them. So the Longshoremen Union, as a show of international solidarity, wanted to uplift that and wanted to be like, we are in solidarity. At the same time, this was kind of at the height of the beginning of like the BLM movement. And so there were connections being made within Oakland that, oh, a lot of the stuff that was coming was actually tools and surveillance technology for law enforcement. So a lot of those connections were made, and we have an amazing video for it too. I'm wondering if maybe Noura or Yusra could put that in the chat for us. But it was just a really good show of international solidarity amongst workers. And it was, till this day, like Yusra said, it was great to see that other people started emulating this, not just even in SoCal, but I think they did it also in the UK and in Florida and in Canada. So other folks were inspired by an action that we started here in the Bay Area, which was amazing. And to this day, actually, the Zim ship, which is the Israeli boat that comes, and it's actually older than the state of Israel. The Zim ship now actually has to pay a different shipping line to be able to come into the Port of Oakland to this day, over 5 years later. So it's had lasting effects, and the workers still will refuse to unload those ships. And so kind of in line with our work around anti-militarism and making the connections between how war and occupation have created a lot of the tools and technologies for law enforcement, there was something called Urban Shield here in the Bay Area. Has anyone ever heard of what Urban Shield was? Cool, couple. So Urban Shield, just for a quick recap, Urban Shield used to happen on the weekend of 9/11, where it was a conference for law enforcement, local, federal, state law enforcement. So they had police, the sheriff, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, ICE. They also brought in the Mexican army, the Israeli army, the Bahraini army to come together to literally share tools, tactics, technologies on how they police. So tools that were literally developed in wartime, tools that were developed against Palestinians in occupation, surveillance technologies, things like that. It would be a war games expo. So they would actually have scenarios where they would put different people wrapped in keffiyehs, those coverings you see in the pictures, the black and white ones. And they would put a lot of like literally black and brown folks and like treat our communities as if we were aggressors. And so Urban Shield had been going on for over a decade. And so our communities came together because we saw this as the intersection of all of our different struggles. As Arab communities, other black and brown communities, we saw this as like, this is literally the state of Israel and all these other foreign entities using their equipment and tools and weapons on their populations to say that they're tested to bring to our law enforcement to use on our communities. And so we actually fought for over 6 years to be able to get Urban Shield out, and we won. And it was one of the longest campaigns we've been a part of, because organizing against police, and this was a project of the Alameda County Sheriff, Sheriff Ahern, who was a huge Trump supporter, who still went against sanctuary policy, who worked very openly with ICE, was holding this up until last year. Well, 2 years ago, excuse me, up until 2 years ago. And so this was a great win for our communities, and all the money that went into Urban Shield, which was from the Department of Homeland Security, actually got broken up. So now that funding would actually go to different first responders, to safety clinics, to other things, because Urban Shield used to just take all the funding for that and say that they were training medics, for example, but they would maybe have like 1 or 2 medic trainings when they would have like 70 for cops. So it was very disproportionate. And we were trying to really claim that we needed housing, we needed healthcare, we needed actual things that supported our lived conditions. And so Third World Resistance was also out there, Build, Defend, Win. This was a campaign that a lot of our organizations felt really strongly attached to. And of course, our last thing, state repression. So state repression is one of the last things we also work on as a organization that does work around anti-racism, that does call out militarism and policing. We recognize that state repression and backlash is so real. Racists are gonna hit back. We've had people, hate call our organization. We've had people try to literally burn the front sign of our organization. But more importantly, we also understand that the state is very interested in making sure we do not build power, whether that's the Arab community or any other marginally oppressed community. And so when we do a lot of our work, we also really try to be mindful around our security practices, mindful of ways in which that things can go after us. So like, for example, when we won Arabic language pathways, had nothing to do with Palestine, for example. We had a bunch of very pro-Israel people actually attack our youth program shortly after we won Arabic. Again, not even connected, but they attacked our youth program because of our connection to Palestine and our unapologetic way of really breaking down the struggles that our communities face. So repression is always real, even if it has nothing to do with what we organize around, for example. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Noura, who's going to talk about what we're currently involved in and start to wrap up.
Yeah. So as part of our, so as a result of our Toad Auth survey, which I mentioned before, the youth-led survey, AROC decided to take up a campaign to defend ethnic studies, specifically, initially it was to defend Arab American studies within the California state curriculum, but then it became a larger campaign to defend ethnic studies. So what essentially happened is that ethnic studies scholars and experts released an original model curriculum that was a really solid curriculum that mentioned Palestine and history of Palestinian Americans specifically in our movements. And that received a lot of backlash from a number of pro-Israeli organizations, and I mean, which are center right. So they're right-leaning organizations. And also there was an attack on the curriculum as a whole. So we see that as like part of a larger attack on critical race theory within America. So yeah, the California governor, he vetoed the bill that required ethnic studies in high school. So there was a number of really racist attacks on ethnic studies. There was a number of calls that we heard people saying, oh, we don't want critical race theory being taught in our schools. So a lot of the attacks on this, again, were very much, it wasn't just about Palestine. It was attack on the entire curriculum, but the attack on Palestine really opened the curriculum up to a number of right-wing organizations. So the same organizations that were essentially trying to facilitate the removal of Palestine and Arab Americans more broadly, were also calling for a kind of all lives matter, more watered down ethnic studies curriculum. So one of the ways that we organize in response to repression is by building solidarity across different communities. So essentially, there was a number of organizations, including the original ethnic studies strikers, who released a statement in support of ethnic studies and sent it to the California Department of Education. Black Lives Matter, Asian Association for Asian American Studies, Jewish Voices for Peace, Arab American Studies organizations. So different organizations that essentially wrote letters in support of the original model curriculum as a result of the backlash. And we also had a number of our youth talk about their support for ethnic studies. So Arab Youth Organizing, we host an annual youth institute where we teach youth about organizing, about Arab American history. This year it was on Zoom. So we talked to youth about our ethnic studies campaign, and a number of them decided that they would take pictures holding signs in support of Arab American studies and ethnic studies more broadly. So again, here's our youth that were a part of the Institute supporting ethnic studies. So again, one of the ways that we organize in response to oppression is to directly mobilize the communities that are most impacted. So Arab youth would be the ones most impacted by the repression of Arab American studies, and youth of color more broadly would be impacted by the attacks on ethnic studies. So Sharif, do you want to talk about where we are now?
Yeah, thanks, Noura. So as Noura mentioned, there was a lot of right-wing attacks on ethnic studies, and that really, well, I guess to say for us, ethnic studies was really important because as the Bay Area is literally where ethnic studies came out of. And for us, ethnic studies, this fight for ethnic studies was part of a legacy of a larger fight to fight for not just inclusion, but really a pedagogy and a curriculum that actually identified and addressed root systems of harm and problems. So it wasn't about, oh, we as Arabs wanted to be mentioned as a form of representation. It was actually about recognizing how systems of war, Islamophobia, occupation, all that intersect with colonialism, with capitalism, with policing, healthcare, all of the systems that we face today. We actually were able to get Cornel West to sign a letter with Barbara Ransby and Robin D.G. Kelly and a bunch of other Black scholars in support. We had Angela Davis on a webinar. We were able to pull out so many folks who were so supportive of making sure that not just Arab American studies was in it, but a curriculum that actually was true to the pedagogy of ethnic studies stayed the way it was. And so what happened was there was a State Board of Ed meeting recently where they decided to vote on the model curriculum that the state had proposed. I think Noura mentioned this, but the original curriculum that was proposed was legit. It included Palestine, Pacific Islanders, but it also really included questions that were critical to understanding our systems of oppression. After several revisions and to what we came up to now, it is written as like an all lives matter curriculum. So it's about how can we represent the people that are sitting in the classroom currently. So it was kind of like we can cherry pick what we want to talk about, what we don't want to talk about. Additionally, now the fight is going to be moving into the local level. So some of the changes, they removed capitalism as a system of oppression. They removed patriarchy as a system of oppression. They removed the language that made ethnic studies because they said it was jargon. They put Jewish studies within Asian American studies next to Arab American studies. And they are now pushing for guardrail language that basically says that if you critique Israel, that's not okay. And actually, we just found out this morning that there's even guardrail language around critiquing certain occupations. So some of the worries are if you critique a police officer, for example, a BLM course could be completely taken off the table. And so where we're at now is the State Board of Education has decided that they were going to pursue this curriculum. All the original writers of the first draft have retracted their names, all of them. They said, this is not ethnic studies and we are not going to support this. Regardless, the State Board of Education moved forward with it. So now they're trying to implement it on all the local levels. And so where we're at now is we just came out of this meeting a couple weeks ago. So now we're at a place, or a few weeks ago, we're at a place where we are trying to build up our coalition so that now it is more than just a statewide coalition, but it is national, and that we'll be able to connect with other partners to figure out ways of how we can support schools. And we're working with other folks called the Liberated Ethnic Studies model curriculum as an alternative to the state curriculum. Because for us, it's not just about the inclusion of Arab American studies, which this version actually does include Arab American studies. But they removed all mention of Palestine, literally erasing us because they said even Rashida Tlaib was too extreme for this curriculum, which was kind of nuts for us, who was like a congresswoman. But like I said, for us, it wasn't just about the Arab American studies. It was about the pedagogy and the discipline of ethnic studies. So where we're at right now is we are fighting to make sure that not only are we represented, but really we make sure that this ethnic studies isn't watered down and it does what it was intended to do, which was to challenge and critique systems of oppression that impact all of our lives every day. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop the share.
Great. Sharif, I saw a hand up from Danielle. Was that right? Did I see that right?
Yeah, it was on accident, but I was just gonna comment on the whole what you were saying, where it was like if a certain curriculum critiques an occupation like a police officer, then it's completely like taken off the table. I think that's just another way of like trying to press the whole movement to get more ethnic studies within school curriculums.
So
Yeah.
who's in charge of putting this sort of guardrail language that you said? Like, who's the one who decides what is okay, what is not okay?
Right now, it is the State Board of Education, but it's also, there's like two bills right now, and I need to figure out which one belongs to which, because there's one for City College, which is, I believe, AB 1040, and then there's another one for high schools, which is AB 101. And AB 101 was shot down by Newsom earlier, which would have been the vehicle that implemented their curriculum into the high schools. But he shot it down because there was a lot of this kind of debate happening within ethnic studies, and there was a push to take it off the table in case it was actually what it was supposed to be. So there was a fear that he would get backlash, and he just erased it. But now it looks like they're trying to push it out again because they did get the watered down curriculum that more or less conservative forces fought for.
Are you in favor of that bill, even though it's going to provide like a more watered down ethnic studies curriculum?
As it is, no. And for a lot of the reasons that I named, like even the occupation one, we just found out they added that this morning. So there's something called guardrail language whenever they're put out like curriculums or bills or anything like that for the curriculum specifically. And so this guardrail language specifically does include like basically trying to depoliticize what is supposed to be a political curriculum is essentially what they're trying to do. And so this guardrail language makes it so that we're not actually engaging with these critical questions, but we're just trying to maintain this like false illusion of multiculturalism.
What's the, I guess, historical or political background as to why they don't want to, get into these heavy topics? Like, are they afraid? Is it just that they're afraid of backlash? Do they have some sort of interest that's at stake? What do you guys think is the reason?
I can share. I'm talking a lot. I know if Yusra or Noodle want to jump in. I've been in a lot of the conversation, so I'm just going to go ahead and start right now. But I would say there's a lot of different forces. So there are forces who are maybe down with ethnic studies conceptually, but don't like the idea of Arab American studies or Palestine within it. There are conservative and there's even a split amongst, I would say, even the pro-Israel folks. There are some who are actually very anti-ethnic studies in any shape or form. And there are some who are saying ethnic studies, but we can't bash Israel. And then there are also conservative forces who are literally anti like this critical race theory education. Trump also was talking a lot about that when he was in office. And so there's a lot of folks who are just trying to end ethnic studies completely. And then I would say some people don't genuinely know. So like at the State Board of Education meeting, for example, when they introduced this curriculum, they had Dolores Huerta speak in the very beginning. Sounds great. I don't think she realizes this. She got cut from that curriculum. And so it was, for me, ironic to see Dolores Huerta speak on something that they literally cut her from. And so that to me indicates that I think there are a lot of well-meaning people who are like, yes, of course we want to say yes to ethnic studies. Ethnic studies is important, and it is. But I think we have to be recognizing how it's being co-opted and it's being framed, because it's being framed as if you don't agree with this specific version of ethnic studies, then you're anti-ethnic studies, which is, I think a lot of people are getting stuck in that trap because they don't understand what ethnic studies is. Some people think it's just history or social sciences, but it's actually its own department, its own pedagogy, its own thing altogether. You wouldn't take out certain language from math because you need it. It's math, it's part of it. Similar with ethnic studies, when we're talking about white supremacy or heteropatriarchy or capitalism, this is language that is a part of the discipline.
I guess I'm not part of your org, but what I would think about that we talked about a little in our Social Justice Week program or have throughout the class is the nuance of like, not exactly analogous to math, but I think the difference between liberal and radical views, like people might in both of those worlds critique capitalism. If you're a liberal, you might not critique colonization and imperialism, right? So you could be a Nancy Pelosi, who's a big war hawk, a big imperialist, loves the benefits of colonization, and not necessarily deconstructing why she has the ability to be in the position she is in society and undermining her ability to be in that position in the future. And I think people who want progress, but that progress wouldn't fundamentally dismantle the structures of the state as we know it, might be against what they see as going too far in non-reformist ideas, right? Like reformist liberals might say we should have some study of race. Race does exist, it's a social construct, but then other people might say, well, there's more than race and ethnicity. There's the legacies of empire and colonization that are still present that we have to study to undo, and people don't want to undo it. So I think that's the only part that I would connect to some of the speakers that we've had in Social Justice Week. If I imagine some students already made that connection, but we heard from like Movement Gen and some other Indigenous perspectives that might bring that in the room as well. So not to cut you off, Noura and Yusra, from whatever you were going to add.
No, I think Shadi, you guys covered it. It was something we also, I guess I would say, is something we saw was the right-wing organizations also organized other communities of color who weren't mentioned in ethnic studies to fight against the curriculum, not realizing that they were being used as a weapon against what people have been fighting for since the 60s. So that was interesting to see too, I would say. Like Sharif said, bringing in people that had no idea what was actually going on and the cuts that were happening. For example, when we were listening in on the calls during the meeting, there were people calling in saying, well, I think, yeah, you guys should be teaching about Arabs, but what about Indians? And they started to name all these other groups and communities when people don't really understand the history of ethnic studies and why specific communities are taught. So it was just interesting to see the division between communities of color too.
Can you talk about that with like the votes that happen sometimes at the state level? So there are these propositions that even though California doesn't have a majority white voter base, there are propositions that voters do direct democracy and vote on, and voters of color vote to undermine the interests, or like kind of divide and conquer, like anti-Black Asian mobilizing to undermine something that would benefit everyone. Could you talk about some of that? I know that's been an issue in recent propositions.
I could say a little bit about that. I don't know if you wanted to say something.
No, you could speak on it.
Yeah, so I think that's always going to be a tactic and tool of white supremacy, unfortunately, is to like find ways to divide and conquer us and to pit us against each other. And like, even in a lot of the work that we do in the communities, like oftentimes under-resourced communities are like full of Black, brown, and immigrants, communities. And so it's like, then they are like perceiving these problems as like, oh, we got to fight for each other for these resources, when in actuality, it's just like a structural issue. And so I think that plays out definitely in a lot of the organizing stuff for the ethnic studies work. Like, it wasn't about multiculturalism. It wasn't about representation. It all comes back to addressing systems of power, always. And even something I got to learn actually, as an ethnic studies student, is like, when they fought for ethnic studies in the 60s, they didn't fight for ethnic studies. They fought for third world studies. And what they got was ethnic studies. That was the compromise. And so I think if we want to take it back to like what people were fighting for and what they were organizing, like it follows. It's not about like, we want to make sure every community is mentioned and named. That's how liberalism operates. But I think like even some of the more recent things that I've been seeing, especially around like all these recent murders and deaths at the hands of like the state and white supremacists here, like I do know, for example, there's been targetings of specific Board of Education members in San Francisco. They're targeting a Black woman named Allison Collins, and it's a lot of these right-wing, like techie conservative folks in San Francisco who dug up tweets from her taken completely out of context when she was quoting Malcolm X, and basically put her as like, oh, she's anti-Asian. And they did it the same week as the Georgia shooting. So there is always these very intentional ways of like trying to split up our communities. And they're trying to fan the flames around that. Asian community and Black community are beefing with each other in San Francisco. And like, that's actually not true. And like, oftentimes like that, like, our communities have always been in solidarity with each other, and I think that there's always going to be these attempts to like to do that. I don't know if that answers your question.
I
I
was
do wanna-
going to talk about Prop 16 without bringing it up directly, but that's okay. I guess the one
Oh,
I
sorry.
in the chat, if the students were going to talk, if the students are interested in learning about like ideas of affirmative action and Prop 16, but a couple times folks use the phrase third world, and I think some students might have a conception of that, but generationally, I think as young as some students are, they might not like understand a first or second world, and then a world that, you know, the third world in response, like decolonizing areas or people that weren't members of NATO in the Cold War. So like, I wonder if you could explain to folks who haven't heard that term what third world meant at the time and what it means now.
I don't know if Noor or you sort of want to say anything. I could also share this one.
Maybe Yusra, you could define it, because I'm not too, you know.
So I'm not expert at this, but I do know when I was in high school, there was, I said the word third world in my class, and my professor, she was an economics professor, teacher. She was like, oh, the third world doesn't exist anymore. And I didn't really understand why she said that. So I know people have different opinions of the word, but from what I know and what I was taught, third world refers to colonized peoples and those still fighting for their liberation and dignity. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, that was great. I just thought probably students, you know, it's a term that not all organizers use today, and students might not have heard it in a way that is being used in an affirmative way.
For the second part of your question around how it used to be seen, for a lot of folks, the third world kind of represented this project that didn't necessarily align with the US's capitalist model or the USSR's Soviet model. And so the third world was this alignment of different countries who more or less have been on the receiving end of like colonial violence and state violence, and was a project that was initiated to kind of be like an alternative to the two. We don't learn about this in high school or anything like that. But of course, because of state repression, because of global economics and all these other things, a lot of those countries are now impoverished, have now been basically punished for not making alliances with certain imperialist nations. And so what the third world is now is exactly what Yusra said.
Except now people will know about it through your work.
Yep.
We are almost at the end, and I'm just super grateful for all your organizing, but grateful that you're giving us wins. It's in a time that's so bleak. It's just a lot. It means a lot to hear that you have organized with other folks from all different backgrounds and won. Danielle, do you want to close us out with your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for me, like, I guess like what I gathered from my studies in high school and in college, I feel like they make it seem like third world countries are countries that need to be like saved by the United States. So it's still like this imperialist view. And from what we've been discussing today, I feel like another, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like another reason why they want to have like such a watered down curriculum is because I feel like they still want to control the narrative of stories that are being told. And this kind of reminds me of when I was learning about colonization and Christopher Columbus when I was in like elementary school. They were making it seem like, oh, like it was such great thing that Christopher Columbus like stumbled upon this land, and you know, it was all better, like fine and dandy. And when I was having this conversation with my parents after school that day, when I learned about it, my dad told me like Christopher Columbus is probably like one of the first like worldwide criminals to be known. And then at the JC, I took a history class in which I was learning about the colonization of Southern America, and I was learning about all the horrible things that were happening. And I was so baffled because in elementary school and middle school and high school, they made it seem like, oh, some people died, but it was really for the better of everything. And then in reality, it was just this like mass genocide of natives in their own land. And so I think that it is very important that we have ethnic studies in which the narrative isn't controlled by those who want to make it fit the picture that they want the United States to look like.
Yeah, I mean, 57 million people were killed and it caused an ice age. It caused a mini ice age. Like the climate, racial violence has to do with climate change way back to that time period and connects so much with organizing today. Such a good point. Do you all want to close us out with anything in particular? If you have opportunities for students to get involved, we love hearing about ways that people can plug in.
So I can speak quickly about our youth program. I don't know if this kind of is for this crowd, but our youth program is for Arab youth ages 14 to 22. We mostly work with SFUSD and OUSD Arab high school students. And a lot of the times, and we have a summer institute that we open up for the whole Bay Area. So that brings in a much larger crowd and age-wise too. But it is for Arab and Muslim youth. And we do have a lot of calls to action. You can also, if you go on our website, you could sign your email up for updates and newsletters that we send. And then I'll also let Sharif talk about membership and how people get involved with our work too.
Thanks, Yusra. Yeah, thank you all so much for having us. It was really great to be here, and I like smaller groups personally, so it was nice. Yeah, so I went ahead and put our website. Oh, thank you. I put the website there, as Yusra said. You can follow us and follow our mail list. We also accept donations if folks feel like helping in that way. And we are right now in a place where we're kind of shifting our campaign because it's moving from the statewide to like the different local levels, and we're trying to figure out how it makes sense as a Bay Area organization to support with that. So we are kind of in this weird, like still figuring it out shift, but I would say that if you're interested in the ethnic studies fight, we can definitely use you and could definitely get support. There are a lot of other organizations that are also supporting us with this. You can go to our website, Save Arab American Studies.org. And you can see some of the orgs that are listed there. We also do sometimes accept volunteers. Our organization is primarily Arab and Muslim based led, but we are also a POC friendly base. So we have some non-Arab, non-Muslim folks in our org as well, part of membership. But yeah, you can also just feel free to hit us up at info@Arab Organizing if you want to just like talk more about some of the stuff we talked about today, or you want to know how to get plugged into our ethnic studies campaign, or even join, even get connected to some of the partners you may see we work with. If AROC is not the place, but you see something that we're working with or someone we're working with, feel free to hit us up. We can try to connect y'all. But yeah, and that's pretty much it. Thank y'all so much again. Noura, I'll let you kind of say your last goodbyes too.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. I appreciate like the different insights and questions that you all had. So just to echo what Sharif and Yusra said about getting involved, even if you're not Arab or Muslim, there's still different ways for you all to get involved in fighting against anti-Arab racism, but also against fighting against white supremacy more broadly.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing us into your space to present and just share the work we do. And I hope one day we could all connect in person after this pandemic is over.
Too, and we're especially grateful that you came if you're fasting. I know that's hard, so thank you. All right, bye.
Bye everyone.
Hi folks, if you didn't join us but you're watching the recording, we just had a little debrief and talked about what we learned in the session and connecting it to current events, and want to remind you to go ahead and have a draft ready of your paper for next week so we can give meaningful feedback to each other's papers in that session. We'll have 2 guests, but we'll also have time to give feedback. All right. Bye, everyone.
Professor, can I talk to you
Alright.
separately?
Sure.